Welcome, folks. We welcome you to this edition of the 700 Club. We've got a lot of important things right now. It turns out that ISIS is regrouping in Afghanistan, and they're hoping to begin fighting in Europe. The center of our country is gripped by human trafficking, and we've got a story about these young girls who actually are being sold, many of them by their parents, into slavery. It's the story you don't want to miss. But the terror group of ISIS is growing stronger in Afghanistan, where it's carrying out deadly attacks as a dry run for a strike on America, possibly Europe. Dale Hurd has more.
The Islamic State may have lost its caliphate in Syria and Iraq, but in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan, the group has grown dramatically and is again preparing to strike on a global scale. Americans have grown accustomed to hearing about car bombings in Afghanistan, but intelligence sources say these attacks over the past few weeks were practice runs for even bigger attacks in Europe and the United States. This official says the Islamic State is once again transforming Afghanistan into a base for international terrorism. He says the Islamic State was not eliminated here. Daesh was just quiet for some time to resupply themselves so they can move to other districts in large numbers. They're armed with snipers, night vision equipment, and powerful weapons. March this year, ISIS loses its final stronghold in Syria, bringing an end to the so-called caliphate it declared in 2014.
We managed to defeat ISIS terrorism from all North and East Syria.
Many assumed the struggle against the Islamic State was finally near an end, but the fighters simply moved east into the mountains of Afghanistan, where they've grown from a few dozen to several thousand. The group is reported to be actively recruiting at universities, looking for tech-savvy Afghans able to travel abroad, use social media, and help plan sophisticated attacks. Unbelievably, some say the best solution may be the Taliban, because the two groups are rivals. Washington is about to negotiate with the Taliban, and some expect the U.S. to offer to withdraw forces from Afghanistan if the Taliban will keep ISIS from using the country as a base for global attacks. Intelligence sources say without an aggressive counterterrorism strategy, the Islamic State will be able to carry out large-scale attacks in the U.S. and Europe within the next year. U.S. authorities have already arrested 8 people with links to ISIS in Afghanistan. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. My solution to this whole thing has been a long time, and I hope that our administration will pick it up. We need to recognize the Kurdish nation. We need to recognize that 36 million Kurds deserve a homeland, and if we have a strong Kurdistan that is backed by United States arms, and that don't go through Baghdad, but go directly to the Kurds in Kirkuk and their other headquarters in that area, we will have a strong group of fighters. The Peshmerga are tremendous fighters, and they can counter ISIS and these other terrorist groups. Without that, if there's a vacuum, and we certainly don't want a resurgence of the Taliban. They're not nice people, and they have put in a dictatorship of Islamic extremism wherever they've been working. So we don't want the Taliban. But the whole idea of an Islamic State that somehow renewed this whole nation in the Fertile Crescent is something we don't want to say. But the answer is to recognize the Kurds, give the Kurds a state, recognize an independent Kurdistan, and then supply them massive amounts of arms, whatever they need to do the job, and they will fight for us. It'll work. Now, in other news, President Trump wants to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. That is a big mistake. Those people have killed Khashoggi and have instituted a reign of terror in their own country. And many members now of Trump's own party are trying to stop him from selling massive arms to that group that are running Saudi Arabia. John Jessup has more on that.
Thanks, Pat. The Trump administration, as you said, is targeting $8 billion in arms sales to Saudi Arabia without congressional approval. And as CBN national security correspondent Eric Phillips explains, administration officials are using the escalating tension with Iran to get around the legislative roadblock.
It's one of those rare times where Republicans and Democrats are seeing eye to eye, and neither of them are on the same page with the Trump administration. The question is, will they be able to stop what the president has already put into motion?
This picked up steam when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Congress the president had declared an emergency and moved to supply Saudi Arabia with precision-armed munitions. The emergency? Trouble with Iran and the need to supply Saudi Arabia.
They may be our allies. They're not really our friends.
An anti-Saudi sentiment growing since last year's murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, making the president's move to circumvent Congress that much more unpalatable. It's upset a bipartisan group on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They have filed 22 separate resolutions to stop the process. The committee's ranking Democrat, Robert Menendez, tweeting, "Rather than stand up against those who murdered Jamal Khashoggi and killed Yemeni civilians, the administration is again trying to coddle them while doing an end run around Congress. We won't stand for it." Republican Senator Lindsey Graham echoing a similar sentiment.
The Crown Prince was, in my opinion, involved in the murder of Mr. Khashoggi, and he's done a lot of other disruptive things. So I don't support the arms sales now.
Michael O'Hanlon with the Brookings Institution says while the Trump administration's move is not inexplicable, Congress still has a major point when it comes to humanitarian issues. He recommends a deal where the United States has involvement in what happens after the sale.
We can provide them some of the weaponry as long as we are more involved in the tactical decision-making on when and where to drop bombs.
As for the politics of it all,
that President Trump better not assume the Senate will save him.
Some Republicans feel comfortable opposing the president on this issue, even this close to an election year, because it's largely considered a secondary issue, one upon which they can stand their moral ground without fear of much backlash. In Washington, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thanks, Eric. Pat?
You know, this Mohammed bin Faisal actually arrested most of his fellow princes in Saudi Arabia. He extorted millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars from them. He has instituted what amounts to a police state in Saudi Arabia, and he clearly was implicated in the murder of Khashoggi. He is not a good guy. And I know the president was warmly received when he went to Saudi Arabia, and he figures they're our friends. But so help me, we shouldn't be arming those people. I know we need a bulwark against the Iranian expansion, but the way to get it is not by backing a vicious dictator, and that's what he is, a vicious dictator who didn't hesitate to reach out beyond the borders of Saudi Arabia and have somebody murdered. We cannot support people like that. And Lindsey Graham and Bob Menendez are absolutely right in what they're saying. John?
Pat, New Yorkers had a scare Monday after a helicopter crashed into a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Investigators say there's no evidence of terrorism, but they are trying to figure out why the pilot was flying in restricted airspace. The crash site, located just a few blocks from Trump Tower. The pilot, 58-year-old Timothy McCormick, died in the crash. He'd taken off just 11 minutes before with limited visibility in rain and fog. The crash started a fire on the roof, which was quickly extinguished by firefighters. No one in the building was injured, but the skyscraper was evacuated. Governor Andrew Cuomo said the crash stirred memories of 9/11.
If you're a New Yorker, you have a level of PTSD, right, from 9/11. So as soon as you hear an aircraft hit a building, I think my mind goes where every New Yorker's mind goes.
Investigators say the pilot did not communicate with air traffic control, which is required in that area. Well, in California, Governor Gavin Newsom and Democrats say their state will now provide tens of thousands of illegal immigrants with full health care benefits. Low-income adults between the ages of 19 and 25, regardless of resident status, now qualify for the state's Medicaid program at a cost of $100 million a year. On CBN's Global Lane program, economics expert Michael Busler of Stockton University said California is now doing more for people living in the state illegally than it is for citizens in need.
And in addition to that, we have a big homeless problem here. In California, for instance, if you're going to spend $100 million, why don't you spend it on helping homeless Americans, 50,000 of which are on the streets of Los Angeles just living in tents?
Some California Democrats did object to the plan, wanting to give free health care coverage to all undocumented immigrants. And Pat, if the deal goes through with lawmakers, it goes into effect January of next year.
I marvel at the insanity of some elected officials. I mean, who are they kidding? I mean, this is absolutely insane. Undocumented workers can get free health care, and Los Angeles, which is a lovely, lovely city, is turning into an uninhabitable slum with thousands of people living on the street, defecating in the streets, the piles of unused or used needles out there, communicable diseases spreading. What a horrible thing to turn a great city into that kind of a mess. And you ask yourself, what is wrong with California? Why do they elect people like that to run their state? John?
Pat, turning to Venezuela, where the economy continues its downward spiral and the ongoing political crisis is locked in stalemate. As Venezuelans lose hope, millions are fleeing across the border to Colombia, where they're faced with new dangers. Chuck Holton reports from Cúcuta, Colombia.
More Venezuelans leave their country each day, looking to Colombia for work, supplies, and medical care. And on that side of the border, the crush of humanity is causing problems as well. Venezuelan Carlos da Silva lived most of his life in England, and when he returned to renew his passport, he found his country in ruins.
Come back to Venezuela to take out new documents, and it's been nearly impossible because the government is just like, basically there's a government, but it's useless, it's worthless. The system doesn't work, nothing works there.
In Colombia, these refugees find little in the way of help, and thousands are sleeping on the street at night, and Colombian police are starting to crack down.
The police officers passed through here and told the women, look, you can't be out here because this is a public space. They told them you need to move, get your stuff and go because you're causing problems with the neighbors and all that.
So this is the entrance to La Trocha, the illegal crossing that goes across the River Táchira into Venezuela. You can see the people coming and going here. This is something that's been going on for some time, but something significant has changed over the last couple of weeks. And what we're seeing now is the Venezuelan gangs who were extorting money from people that were crossing the river are still doing that, but now the Colombian side is seeing rebel groups like the ELN that have wanted to get in on the action. And so they now have guys stationed on the Colombian side that are also extorting money from people. So I'm told that the people crossing here now have to pay twice to get across. These Colombian paramilitaries attacked a restaurant near the border on May 30th, killing one and wounding 14 others, reportedly because the owner refused to pay extortion money to the gang. Attempts to get help into Venezuela have been largely unsuccessful, since forces loyal to dictator Nicolas Maduro burned aid trucks on the border bridge back in February. So this former Navy SEAL is taking a more covert approach. Ephraim Mattis started a nonprofit 2 years ago that sends aid into the hardest to reach areas of need around the world. It's called Stronghold Rescue and Relief.
Stronghold's unique mission also requires unique individuals with unique skills. We're not bringing in large groups of people, and we're completely trying to avoid the idea of volunteerism. So most of the time what we do is we send in 2 or 3 guys who then enable the locals, and we create the capacity for the locals to then be able to help themselves.
After leaving the Navy in 2017, Mattis spent months in Iraq working as a combat medic on the front lines in the battle against ISIS. During intense combat, Mattis was shot while helping to rescue a little Iraqi girl. That experience led to the idea of recruiting other special operators for this unique mission.
So I learned during my time in Afghanistan and in other places that we need to put a local face and enable the locals to be able to take care of themselves.
Here in Cúcuta, Mattis contacted Venezuelan soldiers who have defected and is working with them to help people who are literally dying without needed medication.
We're actually partnering with former soldiers from the Maduro regime who've defected, and we're enabling them to smuggle supplies into the people who absolutely need them the most.
From Cúcuta, Colombia, I'm Chuck Holt for CBN News.
Thanks for that report, Chuck. Well, the crisis in Venezuela is so bad that people have to choose between staying and possibly starving or leaving and possibly dying. Many have decided to take their chances on the roads out of their country. The journey is hot, long, and dangerous, and so Operation Blessing is providing these refugees with much-needed supplies and medical care. Roberto Torres-Cedillo has the story.
This is the highway that thousands of Venezuelan refugees are walking every day as they flee the humanitarian crisis in their country. To get to this point, they have walked 3 days, facing the blazing sun. They're exhausted, dehydrated, and in need of food and basic medical attention. For many of them, the long journey continues into Ecuador, Peru, and as far as Argentina.
I thought it would be easier. I thought it wouldn't hurt this much to see my daughters and my mom in such conditions. One of the first nights we spent in the shelter, my mom had an awful night. She asked us to just leave her there in the shelter we found. She had an stomach issue, and we had to use all the diapers we had for my youngest daughter. Anyway, we have all come as a group, walking, and we haven't split up.
Operation Blessing is strategically positioned to meet and aid Venezuelan refugees along the way. We have set up water filtration systems in key locations along the route and medical tents to treat those suffering from dehydration, respiratory and stomach infections, blood pressure problems, and other ailments inflicted by the journey.
Thank you, Operation Blessings, for the support you have given to the Venezuelans who came on this road with the same destination, with the same need. It is truly a big help. We are very grateful.
Pat, it just breaks the heart to see these mothers and children and hear their desperate stories.
Well, it's amazing the suffering that's caused by evil people, and Maduro is one of them. This is what socialism will do, and the swan song of socialism is being sung here in America to our young people. Venezuela is a perfect example of socialism at its extreme, and the suffering it causes is unbelievable. But Operation Blessing isn't able to change the political climate in Venezuela. But what it can do is help those suffering people. And here's what we're doing. Teams of doctors and nurses out to help the people, medicine and first aid, formulas and vitamins for children, solar lights so they can have some illumination, safe water solutions, and more than anything, sharing the love of Jesus. Now that's what Operation Blessing is doing to help the poor people who are suffering under the heel of this wicked dictatorship in Venezuela. Now, if you want to help, and I'm glad you do, it's Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund, or you can call 1-800-700-7000. And in your name, we're reaching out, as we do around the world, to help those who suffer and who are in need. We want to be the hand of Jesus extended to help people just like those who are suffering in Venezuela.